I found out my brother was sleeping with my wife when I came home 2 days early from the oil rig and saw his truck in my driveway with the engine still ticking hot. And through the living room blinds, I watched them together in a way that told me this wasn't some drunken mistake, but a well-rehearsed routine that had been playing out in my house, in my bed, probably for months, while I was breaking my back to pay for everything they enjoyed. The diamond earrings I'd bought for our anniversary were burning a hole in my pocket, but instead of storming inside like some reality TV husband ready to throw punches and shout accusations, I got back in my truck, drove to a highway motel, and started planning their complete destruction with the same cold precision I'd learned in the Marines, where they teach you that emotional reactions get people killed. Midland, Texas, in late summer smells like superheated asphalt, crude oil, and broken promises, and that Thursday evening it smelled like the end of everything I'd spent 5 years building. My Ford F-250 had rolled up the gravel driveway with the headlights off, an old habit from my time in Helmand Province, where announcing your arrival was a good way to catch an RPG, and I'd wanted to surprise Laura with an early return from my rotation on the drilling platform. Surprise her I did, just not the way I'd imagined during those long nights on the rig when I'd been planning this homecoming like some lovesick teenager. That Chevy Silverado with the lifted suspension and the University of Texas Longhorns sticker plastered across the back window didn't belong in my driveway at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night. It was Ryan's truck, my younger brother, who'd never worked a full year at any job in his 32 years of life, and the metal was still making that distinctive tick-tick-tick sound that engines make when they're cooling down from a drive. Fresh arrival. Maybe 20 minutes tops, which meant he'd come over right after I'd texted Laura that I'd be home Friday instead of today. The living room window glowed with that dim amber light from the lamp we'd bought together at a furniture store in Odessa on our second anniversary, back when I still thought we were building something permanent and real, something worth the brutal sacrifices I was making every single day. I remembered that shopping trip clearly. How Laura had insisted on that exact lamp, because the bronze finish matched her vision for our home, how I'd happily paid the overpriced tag, because making her smile felt like winning something valuable. That memory turned sour in my mouth as I stood in the darkness. I didn't walk to the front door like a normal man coming home to his wife and the life they'd supposedly built together. Instead, I moved into the shadow cast by the detached garage, stepping carefully on the gravel to avoid making any sound, and deliberately staying clear of the motion sensor light I'd installed myself last spring during a rare week off when I'd wanted to make our home safer for her. The irony of that gesture burned like acid. What I witnessed through that window wasn't just adultery in the technical sense, it was the kind of intimate familiarity that can only come from repetition and comfort. Laura threw her head back, laughing at something Ryan said, her hand resting on his chest in that casual way that spoke of countless similar moments, and his hand settled on her waist with the easy confidence of ownership, like he'd touched her there 1,000 times before, and knew exactly how she'd respond. When they kissed, it wasn't the desperate passion of new lovers trying to cram everything into stolen moments before getting caught. It was the comfortable kiss of two people who'd done this many times before and knew they had all the time in the world because the fool paying the mortgage was supposed to be 400 miles away for another 2 days. The velvet box containing those anniversary earrings felt heavier in my jacket pocket with every second I stood there, pressing against my ribs like physical evidence of my own stupidity and misplaced trust. I'd picked them out 3 weeks ago during a rare afternoon off in Abilene, spending 2 full hours at the jewelry store because I wanted them to be absolutely perfect. Wanted to make up for all the missed dinners and canceled plans and nights I'd spent sleeping in a metal container while she was here doing God knows what with my own brother. The urge to kick down that door and confront them both burned in my chest like I'd swallowed gasoline and someone had lit a match. But the Marine Corps had spent 4 years beating the impulsive reactions out of me and replacing them with cold tactical calculation. "Emotion is the enemy of effective action," my drill instructor used to scream in our faces until we understood it in our bones. And right then, I needed to be more effective than I'd ever been in my entire life. Because this wasn't some firefight in Afghanistan where you could rely on training and muscle memory. This was personal betrayal of a magnitude I hadn't known was possible. I took 3 deep breaths, the kind they teach you for staying calm when mortars are falling, put the earring box back in my pocket where I could feel its sharp corners digging into my palm through the fabric, and walked back to my truck with legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The Stardust Inn off Highway 20 is the kind of establishment that rents rooms by the week to oil workers rotating through shifts and people who desperately need to hide from their lives for a while, and that night I became both categories simultaneously in the worst way possible. The Pakistani guy behind the bulletproof glass didn't even blink when I paid cash for 7 days up front, just slid me a key attached to a plastic diamond-shaped tag with the number 117 stamped on it in faded gold numbers, and went back to watching cricket on a small television that looked older than I was. Room 117 smelled like decades of cigarette smoke inadequately masked by industrial cleaner that probably violated several EPA regulations, and the bedspread had mysterious burns and stains that told stories I absolutely did not want to know or think about. But none of that mattered because this wasn't about comfort or standards anymore. This was about survival and strategic planning. I spread my tactical planning notebook on the cigarette-scarred desk, the same type of waterproof notebook I'd used for mission prep downrange when lives depended on getting every detail exactly right, and started building a detailed dossier on my own marriage like it was an enemy position that needed to be neutralized with maximum efficiency and minimal collateral damage to myself and my hard-earned assets. Sleep didn't come that night. But I didn't need it because adrenaline and rage make for excellent substitutes when you're running on pure spite and determination. What I needed was information, documentation, leverage, and a comprehensive strategy that would leave them with nothing except the consequences of their own choices echoing in their empty bank accounts for years to come. The rage was absolutely there. I could feel it coiled in my gut like a rattlesnake ready to strike, but I kept it locked down tight behind layers of tactical discipline because anger makes you stupid, and stupid people make mistakes that cost them everything. I couldn't afford mistakes, not with this much at stake. Instead, I channeled everything into planning, letting my military training take over, treating this like a complex operation that required careful intelligence gathering, tactical patience, and absolutely perfect execution when the moment came. By 4 in the morning, when the weak Texas sun started bleeding through the dirt-streaked window, I had the skeleton of a plan that made me smile for the first time since I'd seen that truck in my driveway. 2 days later, I walked into my house at exactly the time I was supposed to, according to my standard rig rotation schedule, and the smell that hit me when I opened the front door was a mixture of Laura's expensive perfume and heavy-duty bleach that burned my nostrils. She'd been cleaning frantically. I could see it in the way every surface gleamed unnaturally, and the bathroom still carried that sharp chemical smell of industrial-strength disinfectant strong enough to strip paint. She was erasing evidence, destroying the physical archaeology of their affair, playing the devoted housewife role before the husband came home from his dangerous job. I kissed her cheek, and it felt exactly like kissing a department store mannequin, dry and mechanical and completely devoid of any genuine warmth or human connection. She asked about my shift with that carefully practiced, concerned wife voice that would have fooled me completely a week ago. The voice that pretended to care about the very real dangers I faced every single day on that rig, where one mistake could mean death. And I told her I was exhausted, which was the first honest thing either of us had said to each other in God knows how long. She heated up dinner while I sat at the kitchen table watching her move through our home like she had every right to be there, and what she served was tuna casserole with crushed potato chip topping, the kind of comfort food she probably made to impress Ryan with her domestic goddess routine. Every bite tasted like ashes and betrayal, but I cleaned my plate and complimented the meal because maintaining operational security until I was ready to strike was absolutely critical to mission success. She smiled at the praise, that carefully constructed smile that didn't reach her eyes if you knew what to look for, and started telling me inconsequential stories about her day working as a receptionist at the veterinary clinic. Mundane tales about difficult pet owners and a Labrador that had somehow managed to eat an entire sock. I nodded at what seemed like appropriate moments, asked follow-up questions that demonstrated I was listening, played the role of the interested husband while internally cataloging every lie, every evasion, every tiny micro-expression that I'd been too trusting or too exhausted to notice before now. The next 3 weeks were pure psychological warfare disguised as normal married life, and I executed it with the disciplined patience of a deep reconnaissance mission in hostile territory where one wrong move or momentary slip in discipline could compromise everything and get you killed in ways that would make your family unable to identify the body afterward. When Laura took her evening shower, which she did religiously at exactly 8:30 every night, I wasn't checking coat pockets or rifling through her purse like some amateur detective who learned everything from watching too much television. I was systematically accessing cloud storage backups she didn't know existed because I'd set up the family tech infrastructure years ago, installing sophisticated keylogger software on our shared home computer that would meticulously record every single password she typed, every email she thought was private, every supposedly deleted message she assumed would never see daylight. I analyzed bank statements and credit card transactions with the obsessive attention to detail I'd previously used for identifying IED placement patterns in Helmand Province, methodically highlighting suspicious charges at the Red Roof Inn, out on the highway where rooms cost $49 a night, repeated visits to Tommy's Tavern, where we'd never once been together in 5 years of marriage, and especially those inexplicable gas station purchases in Stanton that was nowhere near her normal work commute or any legitimate reason for her to be in that part of the county. The pattern, when I finally mapped it all out, went back 11 months. Almost a full year of systematic deception and betrayal, and the paper trail was as damning as any surveillance footage could possibly have been. Every breakfast she cooked for me, every single time she asked about my day with that fake concern in her voice, every night I lay next to her in our bed, knowing exactly what I knew. It was like swallowing broken glass wrapped in razor wire and washing it down with battery acid. But I smiled and nodded and played the role of Ethan Miller, the oblivious working man, the guy who spent so much time making money on dangerous oil rigs that he didn't notice his wife was spending that money on cheap motel rooms with his worthless brother. I built my case with the methodical patience of someone who truly understands that revenge is a dish best served ice-cold with legal documentation, financial leverage, and the kind of systematic approach that leaves absolutely no room for appeals to emotion or family loyalty or any of the manipulative garbage they'd inevitably try to deploy when the hammer finally fell and their comfortable little world collapsed around their ears. The family ranch outside Abilene sits on 200 acres of scrub brush, stubborn mesquite trees, and broken dreams that my father had poured his entire life into before a massive heart attack took him at 58 while he was fixing a fence line in 100-degree heat. The Sunday barbecue there turned into the moment where I truly understood the full scope and depth of the betrayal that had been happening right under everyone's noses. The heat shimmered off the dusty ground in visible waves that distorted the horizon. Black flies circled the smoking grill in lazy patterns, looking for any opportunity to land on exposed meat, and my mother bustled around Ryan like he was visiting royalty instead of a 32-year-old failure who'd never held any job longer than 6 months or paid his own rent a single time without someone else subsidizing his pathetic lifestyle. She piled the absolute best cuts of brisket on his plate, the ones with the perfect smoke ring and the tender fat marbling, while talking about how he just needed to find his true path in life, how some people are late bloomers and that's perfectly normal and fine, recycling all the enabling garbage she'd been feeding him since he dropped out of community college 15 years ago after 1 semester and never looked back or tried again. Meanwhile, I was the reliable one, the responsible provider, the one who'd paid for more than half of Dad's catastrophic medical bills before he passed and never received so much as a thank you card because that's just what I was supposed to do as the successful son. Sitting on that warped wooden porch with a lukewarm Lone Star beer in my hand and sweat running down my back, I carefully cast my line into the water to see exactly who would take the bait. I mentioned casually, staring out at the shimmering horizon like it didn't matter one way or another, that the drilling company was offering me a 6-month project supervisor position in Oklahoma with a substantial pay increase and better benefits, but I was seriously thinking of turning it down so I could spend more quality time with family and be around to support Laura. The silence that followed my little announcement was thick enough to cut with a chainsaw. I watched them all from behind my sunglasses, tracking every minute reaction, and saw Laura's shoulders go rigid with tension, saw Ryan swallow his beer way too quickly and nearly choke on it, saw my mother jump in far too fast with enthusiastic suggestions that maybe it would actually be really good for my career advancement, that Laura would certainly understand, given the financial opportunity, that family would absolutely still be here when I eventually got back from Oklahoma. They didn't want me around. That much became crystal clear in that moment. I was the obstacle standing between them and whatever cozy future they'd been planning in my absence, and my presence was an inconvenience they wanted eliminated as quickly and cleanly as possible. But what really drove the knife home and twisted it was realizing that my mother either knew exactly what was happening or had deliberately chosen not to see what was going on literally under her nose at family gatherings. The blood loyalty I'd thought was sacred and unbreakable had been violated by everyone at that table, not just Ryan and Laura, but my own mother, who was supposed to have my back no matter what. The verdict in my mind became absolutely final in that sweaty moment on the porch. 3 days after that tense barbecue where I'd watched my entire family reveal their true colors, Laura made her fatal mistake and left her iPad unlocked and unattended on the kitchen counter. The text message from Ryan that lit up the screen while I was pouring my morning coffee might as well have been written in blazing neon letters 10 feet tall for how obvious and damning it was. The message was brief and absolutely devastating in its casual, almost bored tone. "Did you take the test yet? If it's mine, we'll figure something out together. Don't stress. Ethan won't notice anything anyway. He's way too busy with work to pay attention to what's happening at home." I photographed that screen with my phone, my hands absolutely rock-steady despite the massive adrenaline dump hitting my system like a freight train, then calmly walked to the bathroom and started methodically searching through the trash can with the systematic thoroughness I'd learned searching buildings in Fallujah. wrapped carefully in multiple layers of tissues and shoved all the way to the bottom underneath other garbage, specifically meant to hide it from discovery. I found exactly what the timeline and that text message had already told me I would find. A positive pregnancy test with two unmistakably bright pink lines that sealed everyone's fate as completely as any death sentence. The math was brutally simple when I pulled up my work calendar and started counting backwards. I'd been on a 3-week rotation when this pregnancy would have started, sleeping in a metal shipping container 400 miles away and pulling 12-hour shifts in dangerous conditions while my brother was sleeping with my wife in our bed, in our house, probably laughing about what a chump I was. This wasn't my child growing inside her. It was theirs, conceived in betrayal, and they were planning to hang it on my name and my bank account like I was some kind of idiot patsy too stupid or too tired to count to 9 and do basic arithmetic. The rage that hit me then wasn't the hot explosive kind that makes you break things and scream. It was cold and surgical and calculating. The kind of controlled fury that comes when you realize you've been living in an active minefield and only just now noticed all the tripwires. I didn't punch the bathroom mirror or kick holes in the wall or engage in any of the theatrical masculine breakdown behaviors that would have given them warning that I knew. Instead, I walked very calmly to my home office, closed and locked the door behind me, and called the best divorce attorney in all of West Texas. Marcus Hoffman didn't traffic in feelings or reconciliation speeches. He dealt exclusively in outcomes and favorable settlements, and when I laid out everything I had gathered over the past month, he got very quiet for a long moment and then said 6 words that changed the trajectory of everything. "We can bury them completely, totally legal." The financial blitzkrieg I launched the very next morning while Laura was at her receptionist job and Ryan was wherever he spent his worthless days pretending to look for employment would have made my old tactical operations officer proud. I moved with absolute military precision, executing each carefully planned step of Marcus's strategy like a combat operation with zero room for hesitation or second thoughts. I transferred every dollar of liquid assets I could access into offshore accounts and irrevocable trusts that Laura couldn't touch, even with the best lawyer in the state, filed for divorce in a county where the judges had reputations for not caring about tearful reconciliation speeches or appeals to save the marriage. I attached every single piece of evidence I'd meticulously gathered over 3 weeks as official exhibits to the divorce petition. Screenshots, bank records documenting her spending, hotel receipts, that absolutely beautiful text message about the pregnancy that proved paternity fraud. In Texas, adultery significantly affects property division, and I had documentation that would make any judge see things my way. I listed our house for immediate sale to a cash investor who specialized in quick closures with zero complications, accepting an offer within 24 hours that was 15% below market value but came with no contingencies, no inspection period, and a 2-week closing that was faster than anything traditional. I systematically canceled every single credit card linked to my primary checking account that had her name attached to it, removed myself from the truck lease I'd stupidly co-signed for Ryan 18 months ago when he'd begged for help getting transportation, and methodically pulled my financial support from every thread and connection that tied me to either of them or their future problems. By noon on that Thursday, everything was signed, notarized, officially filed with the county clerk, and set in irreversible motion. The legal machinery was grinding their comfortable future into dust, and they didn't even know the gears had started turning yet. There were no confrontations, no chances for them to cry and explain and try to manipulate me with appeals to our history together, just cold paperwork and official signatures and the merciless machinery of legal consequence rolling forward like a tank. Marcus called me at 2:15 that afternoon. I remember checking my watch and informed me that his process server had successfully delivered the divorce papers to Laura at the veterinary clinic where she worked, and that according to his contact who'd witnessed the service, she'd gone completely white and had to physically sit down to avoid falling over. Good, I thought with savage satisfaction. I sincerely hoped it hurt worse than anything she'd ever felt. The day I designated as Day X in my planning notebook arrived with me packing a single tactical backpack, the same type I'd used during my deployments, with nothing but absolute essentials. Important documents, laptop computer, several changes of practical clothes, basic toiletries. Everything else, all the furniture we'd supposedly picked out together to build our life, the wedding photos in expensive frames, the kitchen gadgets we'd received as gifts, the entire elaborate stage set of our completely fake marriage, I left behind like props from a theatrical production I was permanently done performing in. The keys to the house went on the kitchen table next to those diamond anniversary earrings still in their velvet box, which I placed directly beside my wedding ring that I'd worn for 5 years. I didn't leave any kind of note or explanation because what was there to say that 40 pages of divorce papers with attached evidence exhibits hadn't already communicated with perfect clarity? Silence cut so much deeper than words ever could, and I wanted them to absolutely drown in the deafening quiet. The taxi to Midland Airport picked me up at 4 in the morning when the streets were still empty, and by 6:30 I was on a flight to Seattle with a connection to Anchorage that would put me in Alaska by early evening. My beloved Ford F-250 was already sold to a dealer for cash that was safely in my new account. The job on Kodiak Island that absolutely nobody in Texas knew about was waiting for me. A 1-year contract on a remote drilling operation where the pay was nearly triple what I'd been making, and the isolation was exactly what I needed to rebuild myself. I pulled the SIM card from my phone before boarding the first flight, snapped it cleanly in half with my fingers, and dropped both pieces in an airport trash can. For everyone back in Texas, Ethan Miller had effectively ceased to exist. Kodiak Island in February is nothing but endless gray ocean stretching to the horizon in every direction, jagged black volcanic rocks that look like broken teeth jutting from the frozen water, and relentless wind that cuts straight through every layer of clothing you're wearing, like you're completely naked and exposed to the elements. The temporary housing the drilling company provided was basically a glorified shipping container with a narrow bunk that was barely long enough for my 6-foot frame, a struggling space heater that rattled and wheezed while barely keeping the interior temperature above freezing on the worst nights, and a small window that looked out on absolutely nothing except more gray ocean and gray sky merging into an indistinguishable horizon. I didn't care even slightly about the primitive conditions because comfort and luxury weren't why I'd fled 3,000 miles north to this isolated rock. Through a secure server connection routed through 3 different countries to maintain my complete anonymity and avoid any possibility of being traced, I methodically monitored the chaos and destruction unfolding back in Midland like watching a controlled demolition from a safe distance where the blast couldn't touch me anymore. The bank alerts and transaction notifications started coming almost immediately. Declined, declined, declined. Laura, trying to buy groceries at the store she always used, card declined. Ryan, attempting to fill up his precious Silverado at the gas station, card declined with insufficient funds. Then the official realtor notifications began arriving in my email. Locks changed on the house. Property professionally staged for showing. Formal notice to vacate within 14 days. My call logs on the virtual number showed hundreds of increasingly desperate attempted calls over the next week, first from Laura, then Ryan, then my mother, then all of them calling in rotation like they'd coordinated a schedule. The voicemails I didn't listen to but could imagine perfectly. Confusion turning to anger, turning to panic, turning to desperation as they slowly realized I wasn't coming back, wasn't answering, wasn't playing their game anymore. My mother tried to leverage old family friends and contacts to track down my location, but Marcus had made absolutely certain that my new employment information was legally sealed, and my official forwarding address was a post office box that went directly to his law office where his paralegal screened everything. Ryan lost his precious lifted Silverado within 3 weeks when he couldn't make the monthly payments without my co-signature artificially propping up his terrible credit score. Laura, now 7 months pregnant with another man's child, was suddenly facing single motherhood without any of the financial safety net she'd been counting on to cushion her landing. Their elaborately constructed house of cards collapsed from a single breath of wind, and I was 3,000 miles away in the frozen north, watching it all burn down through status updates and official notifications. I felt absolutely nothing except a cold satisfaction that justice was being served. An entire year passed in an exhausting blur of brutal 12-hour shifts in sub-zero temperatures, freezing rain that felt like needles, and the kind of bone-deep physical exhaustion that actually helps you sleep dreamlessly through the night. I got harder, leaner, quieter, more comfortable with my own solitary company than I'd ever been surrounded by people and their inevitable drama. The crew on the drilling rig didn't ask personal questions about why someone with my experience and resume was working this far north in these conditions, and I didn't offer any explanations or backstory. We did the dangerous work, collected our substantial paychecks, and retreated to our separate containers and separate lives. It was honest in a way that nothing back in Texas had ever been. Ryan somehow found my work email address, probably through the oil field contractor network that connects everyone in the industry, and the message that appeared in my inbox one frozen March morning had a subject line designed for maximum emotional manipulation. "Please, brother, I'm literally begging you." I opened it in the warm break room with a cup of black coffee going cold in my hands and methodically read his pathetic attempt at pulling my heartstrings. The message detailed how incredibly hard things were for them now, how the baby had health problems that required expensive treatment, how they'd lost absolutely everything, how Laura cried herself to sleep every night, how he'd made terrible mistakes, but family should always forgive family no matter what. He asked for money, not a small amount either, but enough to supposedly get them back on their feet and stable again. He invoked the concept of brotherhood, like that word still meant anything after what he'd done, like sharing DNA somehow erased the fact that he'd betrayed me in the most fundamental way humanly possible. I read the entire pathetic message twice, not out of any consideration for helping, but out of morbid fascination that he genuinely believed this manipulative approach would actually work on me. Then I clicked the reply button and typed exactly 2 words in response. "You chose." I hit send, permanently blocked his email address from ever contacting me again, and deleted the entire message thread from my inbox. The coffee had gone completely cold, but I drank it anyway, finding the bitter taste somehow appropriate for the moment. Marcus sent me the final legal documentation 3 months later in a thick envelope marked Official Court Records. The judge had formally recognized the adultery with a scathing written opinion. The court-ordered DNA test had officially confirmed Ryan as the biological father, removing any legal ambiguity, and I was released from any and all financial obligations regarding the child or Laura's welfare going forward. My carefully protected assets were completely secure. The house sale proceeds were legally mine, minus what the court determined was minimally hers given the adultery finding, which wasn't much at all. The private investigator's final report I'd commissioned for complete closure told me everything I needed to know about their current pathetic situation. Ryan was under criminal investigation for some petty fraud scheme involving false workers' compensation claims. Laura was living in a deteriorating trailer on her mother's property with a colicky baby, and according to social media screenshots, they were constantly at each other's throats, their relationship imploding under the weight of reality and consequences. They'd become exactly what they deserved to be: two people permanently stuck with the consequences of their choices, tearing each other apart like rats trapped in a barrel. I didn't feel triumph reading that investigator's report, just a cold, clinical satisfaction that justice, harsh Texas-style justice, had been properly served. I hadn't destroyed them through any action of my own. I'd simply removed the financial scaffolding and support structure I'd been providing that kept their dysfunction from collapsing under its own considerable weight. They'd built their entire relationship on lies and my money, and when I removed both foundations simultaneously, gravity did the rest of the work for me. The coastline of Kodiak Island has these specific places where the land just abruptly ends in sheer cliffs, dropping 100 feet straight down to churning water below. And the Pacific Ocean hammers against black volcanic rock with a primitive fury that's been going on continuously since before humans existed to witness it or give it meaning. I found one of those remote spots on a rare day off from the rig, stood right at the crumbling edge where one wrong step would mean a fatal fall onto rocks that would shatter every bone in my body, with the icy spray hitting my face like thousands of frozen needles trying to penetrate my skin. I breathed deeply for what felt like the first time in 2 years, filling my lungs with clean Arctic air that tasted like salt and freedom and the complete absence of betrayal. There's no lying up here in this harsh place, no scheming or manipulation, no toxic family politics or elaborate deceptions, just the raw ocean and the brutal wind and the kind of honest, back-breaking work that leaves you too physically exhausted for anything except deep, dreamless sleep where the past can't reach you. My phone vibrated insistently in my jacket pocket, the new one I'd gotten strictly for emergencies and essential work contacts. Unknown number, but the area code was definitely Texas, 432. Probably my mother making one final desperate attempt to guilt me into reconnecting with the family, or maybe Laura hoping that single motherhood would somehow magically soften me up and open my wallet. I pulled the phone out and stared at the screen while it buzzed in my hand like an angry trapped insect. For maybe 2 seconds I almost answered it, almost let the past reach across 3,000 miles and pull me back into their endless drama and dysfunction. Then I powered the phone completely down, wound up like I was throwing a grenade at an enemy position, and launched it as far as I possibly could into the churning gray water far below. It disappeared without even a splash, just another piece of garbage the ocean would grind to nothing, and I felt lighter and freer than I had in years.